Hello everybody, my name is Travis and welcome to Magic Dragon. So I'm making an indie game called Where's My Lunch? And I have a demo out right now, but it kind of sucks. And I did a couple things to fix it up, so I figured I'd just give you guys an update on where the progress is at. First things first, one of the major changes I made was that I made the zombies movement not random. And I basically set waypoints for each zombie to follow so that they can have pre-planned paths and stuff like that. Before I had it set that it's just a box and then they pick a random spot in the box and then go to that point. However, that's kind of just bad and quite frankly lazy game design, and that's pretty much why I did it. Basically, I didn't want to have to plan each of the paths for every single zombie because there's a lot of enemies in the game, and so I figured that planning the paths would take a lot of time. But actually, it didn't take that much time at all. But something else that came of it was that I thought that I didn't want to have control of the paths that the zombies take when they're just walking around idly. But I actually benefited a lot from being able to say exactly where they go. For example, I can make the zombies line up with the wax machines. If anyone's played my game, they probably don't even know that they can actually use the wax machines. I kind of just have it as a text that pops up when you walk past like the first or second one that tells you can use them, and then kind of don't really encourage to use them at all because the zombies will have to randomly line up with them. However, since I have the pre-planned paths, I can make them, walk in front of the wax machine for an extended period of time, kind of giving that incentive to be able to use the wax machines in an effective way as opposed to just kind of randomly lucking into it. I can also make sure they don't randomly step on rakes. So sometimes you can pick up a rake and it'll have 2 durability points already knocked off of it because the zombie stepped on it when you were 30 feet away, but you never see it or hear it because you weren't there for it. But if I plan the zombies' paths, I can make sure that they never just randomly step on it, at least not on their normal idle path. And also I can make zombies linger around areas that I want them to. So for example, if I want the player to go in a certain spot or be able to have time to set up a wax machine or cut some wires or something along that lines, I can make sure that the zombie isn't around that thing for a little bit more time than rather just preying on random chance. So overall, I thought that I didn't want to have control over them at all because I thought that it would be easier on me and better for the game, but actually both of those things turned out to not be true. Another thing that I discovered over these past couple weeks working on the game is that I suck at animation. How do I say this? How do I say this and not sound like an absolute nerd? Me and my friends did this fun side project, and I ended up using Blender to create some 3D animated videos. And while I did have a fun time animating them, I realized how bad the animating is. And that's just one thing that I have to keep in mind going forward, is that I definitely need to get better at 3D animation because it's bad. I always just figure that the cutscenes in the game that are as is kind of just needed more time and more effort. I did kind of slap them together with a arbitrary deadline that I gave myself, but I think it would benefit just from starting from scratch and starting over with more experience in the future, because I think that's just how it gets better. I don't think I can really tweak it in the state that it's in now for it's something that's kind of acceptable. And the last thing I want to touch on right now was that I finally fixed the camera. So if you played the demo, you have most likely, if you didn't, I can't believe you avoided it, is the camera gets blocked by the walls all the time. So I could not for the life of me figure out the right code to get it so that the camera always blocks the player. But I actually finally nailed it. It took me a while, but the camera pretty reliably is always able to see the player, and it doesn't get obstructed that often anymore. I say that often, but I could not create a consistent situation where it was obstructed, so that's a huge step in the right direction. However, because of the way that the script works is that it basically blocks an object, or it basically turns off the mesh renderer of the object if it's obstructed. But originally, how I had the level kind of segmented out, I had a lot of individual wall segments, so I had to go ahead and redo the entire levels so that it's just kind of made up of these long strips instead of a bunch of individual tiny strips, if that makes sense. Okay, so this is Future Travis here editing the video, and I figured I'd give a quick explanation for why I was having so many problems with the camera, because if you've spent any more than 10 minutes in game development, you know that if you can't figure out how to do something, you just ask the internet. And I did, but the answer wasn't very helpful. So basically, there's this common look-through walls script that's being passed around. If you YouTube how to get it to see through walls, it's probably the first three all use not the same exact script, but the same method. And let me explain why it didn't work real quick. So if you take a look at the project here in Unity, you can see that the walls are not just blank walls. Well, I mean, they are blank, but they do have they are prefabs, right? And so the solution that I found online only works if the wall is like a cube or something, and it's one singular object. However, if you take a look at these lockers right here, these lockers, there's 3 of these lockers in one lockers prefab, which is then in this 4 lockers prefab, which could also be in part of like, you know, a wall prefab or something like that, or these wall pieces that have lockers on them. So that's the problem I was having. If there's one game object that's obstructing you, it'll block that one game object. However, if that object is nested inside of a couple layers of game objects, then that solution won't work. So if we look at the code here, what I had to do for real quick is for the hide obstruction function right here, I basically had to make it nested so that if the mesh renderer was detected, then it would change it to, you know, shadows only, and then it would iterate through each of the children of that to make sure that there are no children that are being left out of this, because that was the problem. And also, if, you know, the prefab was obstructing the player, then it would try to turn off the mesh renderer, but it's just a prefab. It might not necessarily have the mesh renderer, but it is made up of a bunch of child objects that do have the mesh renderer. So I thought I'd just give that explanation real quick. Maybe I'll go more in depth about the solution to this in case anyone else is having this problem, but that'll be for a later video. Anyway, back to the video. I've also begun working on the remodel of the main character Bryce, and it looks a little bit better in my opinion. I've gotten some decent progress I'll show you right now. But I think it'll take maybe 1 or 2 more iterations before it's something that I actually like, or that I'll be comfortable releasing. But that I'll probably showcase that in a future video. But all that being said, there is still a lot more to fix and a lot more to do. A couple of things that I want to do is I want to add a corner peek. I feel like the camera, while I did make it so that I can effectively see through walls now and kind of is not really obstructing the player all that much, it is still hard to kind of see what's ahead, and, you know, it's a stealth game at its core, so it's very important to be able to assess the threat before you engage in it. Also, while the zombie movement is planned on a set path and it does work really effectively, the problem is that the current implementation of it, if the zombie chases you over to, you know, another part of the map and then it loses you, it'll just walk back to the set points on the path. So I think I'm going to have to give it an alternate state where it actively searches for the player in the area that it lost the player in and doesn't just go back to where it was standing before. Does that make sense? And then, of course, there's also the looming issue of the soundtrack. It's still the same soundtrack as before, but I am working on and researching ways to create my own soundtrack. So hopefully I'll be able to come up with something soon. Yeah, so that about wraps up this video. So thank you guys for watching so much, and stay tuned for more updates. Bye, guys.